It's a pleasure to have three speakers with us today on the panel. We'll try to, I think, go a bit deeper and further into the topics that Ruta presented and I think really resonated in the chat. During the panel, similarly as during the Ruta's presentations, please ask questions in the chat or also raise your hand after we're finished. So today in the panel discussion, I'm joined by three speakers, each representing, I would say, a different side of the ecosystem. We have a business representative, we have a digital innovation hub representative, and we also have a digitalization experts more broadly who kind of will look at this from what the broader evidence is suggesting. So allow me to introduce the three speakers. So we have Irina Toma, who is the coordinator of Futures Innovation Technology FIT, European Digital Innovation Hub, and she has over 10 years of experience working with digitalization, innovation, and sustainability. Throughout her career, Irina has worked with digitalization of various sectors, most of them very related to our study, so including agri-food, manufacturing, textiles, construction, digital health, among others. We also have Katrin Schade, who is a research associate at the Institute for Urban Development and Construction at the University of Leipzig. And her research focuses on smart cities, digitalization of retail and urban development more broadly. Finally, or last but not least, as is very much often said, we have Cătălin Podaru, who is the founder and acting CEO of Leviatan Design, one of the leading engineering companies in Romania. And Cătălin witnessed and led Leviatan through an extensive period of digitalization. I think that lasted more than 10 years and involved several stages. So I'm very keen to ask some questions to all of you today. I think I can introduce all of you for much longer, but actually let's go to the questions. So maybe to start us off and kind of deep dive sort of way to also what were the last questions asked in the chat as well. So as Ruta mentioned, we see that there is somewhat of a tension between the fact that SMEs, their strength is their flexibility and adaptability. SMEs are very quick to react to the outside world and kind of the different risks that we see come up now more often and often. Yet, research really suggests the importance of having planning, having digital strategies, having roadmaps in place, and really thinking long-term when it comes to digitalization. Yet, a minority of the companies that we looked at actually had these in place. So I will ask maybe a broad question on how can SMEs implement long-term strategic planning while actually maintaining agility and reacting to these day-to-day challenges that occur. So maybe I'll start actually with Cătălin because you represent a company here and I think you have a personal story as well that I think would be very interesting to hear in the context of this question.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. So regarding this question, I believe that indeed there is the need of a planning. In our case, such a plan was not materialized in a written strategy, but actually we have, let's say, a general overview of objectives where we want to reach in time. Now we have it materialized more like a mind map of objectives, but the transformation for us was indeed quite agile, identifying the needs, the problems, and finding the solution. Also, as mentioned before, in our case, what was the first step in this was actually a real transformation of processes, mapping the processes initially, have it well structured, and then finding the right tools and softwares to implement those processes more agile, more lightly for the user. And then we actually we kind of took it on a step-by-step process, and this helped us a lot also with the change management in the company, because the changes came one by one, and people actually were easy to accept these changes. So moreover, what's important in our case for these changes is that we had a group, an initial group in industry. They are called champions, early adapters with a change mindset that were part of these processes, process mapping, process changes, experimenting. Every time we have in our company experimental phase where we test the solution to see they are viable, they are easy to adopt, and then actually we materialize. So I don't know if this answered your question, but this was the process in our case, and it's a continuous process also.
I think that's a key word, right? It's a continuous process. Maybe I can ask a quick follow-up as well, Cătălin. What was your motivation in the first place at Leviatan to start digitalizing? What kind of kick-started this whole journey of digitalization?
What our intention is to actually create a system in the company that was not based only on certain people, because in every company, in every startup, you have the founder that kind of is involved in everything. So then you add up people with skills and knowledge that are growing. But in any company, personal fluctuation are happening. Even the founder from a level on cannot be anywhere. And we actually wanted to create a system where things are done on a standard way, easy to adopt by any new employee, that after acquiring very fast the knowledge of how to perform the task, then he could improve upon that. Moreover, to add up to this system, our intention was to also create organizational memory, as we said, because we want to keep inside our processes, written processes, and then strategies, all the skills and the lesson learned step by step on each other. We actually have ongoing process on learning the lesson and then disseminating them easily to all our employees, because the system and the quality of the product or the service we deliver, we want to be predictable. So having this system that would be at the core of the company and presenting predictability both for employees but also for the clients was the main the startup point where we want to, because where we want to go from initially.
Very clear. I kind of wrote in bold: organizational memory and predictability. I think that's really important. Katrin, I think I will turn over to you, because from what I remember, your research focused a lot on these smaller, like really micro enterprises. And I'm curious, what is their experience when it comes to digitalization? Is it usually a reaction to something that's, outside the world and outside crisis? Or is it more of this carefully long-term planning process that you observed?
Thank you, Barbora. I think it really depended on the single interviewer I was talking to. Like, some were from their previous experience that they had from working in another company or working in a certain field. They already brought a lot of know-how and skills into their company. I mainly deal with retail companies. That they helped them further also with digitalization. So for example, I had a controller who was already involved in digitalization processes before, so that helped him a lot to develop the company further. And some interviews also said that it also depends a lot on how well you know your business. So if you know your business well, your customers, you know the market, then it's easier to develop digital skills as well, or implement digital tools. So that was also very important. And some said that they have the feeling that some companies don't know these processes very well. So it's actually more a problem that needs to be solved before thinking of digital tools and then thinking of how to implement those ones. So these were like two processes, and I think one needs to be highlighted also, that also Cătălin said, that it really depends on the people that are employed. So if you have small companies and you have maybe 2, 3, or maybe 4 people employed, then it really depends on their personal skills and also the conditions and everything, how they adapt to these tools. So if you're one person in charge, like one manager, and you have to deal with the lack of skills and different lacks of skills of your personnel, then it's really difficult to develop these tools further and to implement it.
Very relevant indeed, adaptability, skills, and actually knowing your market and knowing where you fit in the bigger ecosystem. Irina, I will talk to you with a slight variation of this question. As a digital innovation hub, I think you work with many different companies and you do see many different scenarios of how digitalization plays out. So maybe what's your take on this long-term planning versus really being agile and reacting to the market, and what has been your experience as a hub from working with companies and using innovation roadmaps, digitalization strategies? How do companies interact with these materials?
Hey, Barbora, and thank you for inviting me to share our experience from the central region of Romania here. Central region, first of all, and I think most parts of Romania are very, very lowly digitalized. There are a lot of companies struggling even with basic technologies here. And my experience of working with SMEs has been that they definitely need support in getting orientation, in understanding what technologies are relevant for their company and then prioritizing them, in developing a financing plan for the different types of technologies that they need, because a company that barely has a website but is doing well in manufacturing or in another sector, they might find it challenging to implement even a basic ERP at the beginning, and then even think about the investments needed in order to digitalize or their equipment, their manufacturing equipment. And all this requires specialized knowledge that they usually don't have access to. We've been very happy to run a few pilots also through the Digitalized SME pilot project that preceded the Digital Innovation Hub program. And that allowed us to bring specialized expertise to certain factories. And that was really helpful. But also our experience has shown that even though you create this roadmap, it often takes many years for companies to be able to follow up with it. And that's why I'd like to congratulate Cătălin for having implemented such a profound digital transformation in his company in only 10 years. And I think that required a lot of commitment and a lot of perseverance. And I'm glad he had the vision and the strength to carry it through. And I find it very valuable that we're looking at different models and various experiences of companies through this study, because we definitely have to figure out how to become closer to companies and offer services, the services that they really need in order to become more digitally mature. And I think this is our mission as digital innovation hubs, and we're very excited to work with companies in the coming 3 years on these issues.
Thank you, Irina. And a question, a follow-up on the digital maturity assessments. This is something I think that the Commission promotes and is also done by digital innovation hubs. I think that also usually something that's helpful for companies in identifying their needs a bit more, maybe seeing their gaps, right, and really thinking of what technologies can be helpful for them. Has that been the experience at the hub as well?
Yeah, so we've been discussing, obviously, because we're preparing the launch and all the services, and we've been discussing how to conduct these studies with the SMEs. I think for them it will be a real benefit to just have an assessment and really for somebody, and I'm speaking here not necessarily for the front runners, but for the great mass of companies that are just starting on the digitalization journey. And I just think a basic assessment of where they are on different aspects of their company will be very helpful. And I think they'll be very curious to know how they compare with other companies in their region. As far as I know, the digital maturity assessment tool doesn't yet provide this benchmarking option, but it would be something very interesting. And also to create a cross-European comparison, because of course, for example, Romanian companies are interested in learning how their Spanish or their Portuguese counterparts are doing. And I think we have a lot of opportunities to develop this further in the coming period. Yeah.
Great. Cătălin, I saw you also nodding just now when we spoke about, understanding where your company stands and understanding your needs. So is this something that Leviatan did, or maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about how you went about, identifying your needs for digitalization and maybe mapping these processes that you mentioned? What was the experience there?
So actually, I was nodding because even for us, going through the process, sometimes you are fully immersed in your transformation, but in order to, let's say, to have a reference point or about what you're doing, this is something that you need to know. Also in Romania, and not only in Romania, we see a lot of people in the past 3 years at least, but even earlier in our industry, speaking about the need to approach technical changes, technological changes, and also digitalization. So when you're doing that, I think from time to time having this like a test benchmark to see where are you actually, if it's the right way. It's kind of like a navigation compass that the route you took on it's good, and also in time you can learn from best practices and time to implement. Also, you need to know if your process is fast or it's slow. So this information, I think it's important for us. We in terms of how we did it, I told you that what we did initially was need driven, so our needs were the driver to go on. But from time to time we stop and evaluate from open sources, from best practices presented in different materials, and especially in construction, because we have a standard BIM process that actually refers to the whole industry on implementation digitalization. This is a standard at the level at the Europe Union. So we stop and see if our mapping implementation of the certain processes and software instruments is accordingly to the BIM principles, which helped us seeing that we are going to the right path. Moreover, because in construction, even Romania now has voted the memorandum of a roadmap, national roadmap, to transform the construction industry and make it accordingly to the BIM process, which is a European Union directive on transforming construction process and acquisitions. Actually, even for us, seeing these changes that were happening and seeing that the industry will go from a certain point on a standard, national or European standard, it was important for us to know that at that point, the way we develop our processes and digitalize our process are still compatible. So this is another aspect that was important for us to see that going forward, we are going the right direction. When the standard will be general, applied by national laws or regulation, we will be compliant or compatible. So that was important for us. Luckily, with all the digital hubs because also we have in Romania clusters and hubs that are focused on this kind of transformation. We were glad to see that we actually are living inside the principle that governs this process transformation, BEAM, process transformation. And we saw that even with any international standard that exists in other country, we can easily match up to it and be compatible.
Thank you, Cătălin. So indeed, knowing your needs, but also knowing the market, again, really what Katrin was saying, seeing how the market is developing and how your company is fitting into that market to make sure everything is kind of compatible and you're moving in the right direction. I would like to also turn to Katrin again, because you mentioned this, and I think some other panelists also mentioned the importance of the right attitude and company culture. And Katrin, you just mentioned as well that even when you have 3 or 4 people, there can already be some challenges or tensions. I don't know, in your experience and from your research, how can companies facilitate or foster this culture that's open to change and open to maybe this uncertainty that sometimes digitalization can bring?
Well, I think communication was the key in these processes, like that the manager was able to communicate well with the staff, and also to have the opportunity to send them to some training. And I think this was also one of the main problems, that knowing the right providers for the tools and then having the opportunity to get some training, some proper training that kind of applies to all the lacks of skills that the staff had. That was a certain problem. So finding a service provider and also finding a way to train them in a certain way, and also finding the time, because for small companies it's always a time issue, and to make sure that all the needs are adapted somehow. So yeah, to kind of find a way to train them while doing these processes and developing the tools further, this was one of the main issues. And I think, like, when we turn to service providers, this is probably something that we also should talk about, like how can these companies find the right providers for what they want to pursue in the company. And I thought for most of the interviews I had, this was one of the main issues, because there's so many out on the market, and to figure out who's the right one and who has the most interfaces for all the tools that they need. That was a huge problem. And what helped further in this way was to go on fairs. Actually, what a few interviews told, that they are going on fairs and find or connect with the providers, talk to them, communicate to them, and then also have a look at who is available regional, to, in case there's any problem, to go talk to them, but also have someone available who can come over and solve a problem if there's any.
I will actually maybe open the floor, but Irina, Cătălin, would you like to react? Because I think service providers is indeed a big aspect of, you know, how you continue in the road to digitalization. And I saw both of you were sort of nodding at the same time.
Yeah, because actually when you start doing that and you make a choice about choosing your service provider, even for us was a challenge. What would we choose? Because this choice, it's long term, not mid term, it's long term. Both because every service provider, in our case, software providers, it's important to meet many needs, to become compatible with different solutions. But also, what was important for us to know that that there is a service provider that has an ongoing development of solutions. And this is something we took in consideration, although sometimes was a leveling between a certain provider and the cost of the service. But eventually, all this analysis took us to choosing the long-term solution the provider that we knew that it was going to develop continues the solution he offered, because once you make the investment and you start training the people, modifying the process, making internal manuals as we did, and utilizing these softwares, for example, it's kind of hard to go back and say, okay, I choose wrong, so now everything we start from the beginning. So in our case, we went with a long-term solution, taking the service provider with the most comprehensive, let's say, spectrum of solution for every needs, with the compatibility and in a, let's say, reasonable budget according to our budget that we had for this.
Very clear. So once again, I think it goes back to knowing your needs, right? Knowing what you need in the long term, understanding your processes, also your constraints at the same time. And Katrin, I see you have your hand raised, so go ahead.
Thank you, Barbora. I also had two experiences from the Netherlands and also Switzerland, like from the States, who gave out vouchers to get in contact with service providers. So they got some kind of voucher to first get in contact and get some ideas what the service providers offer, and then be able to choose wisely what suits best for the company. And these two examples were like told to be very good to develop further with the service providers. So I think it was like vouchers for a certain amount of money that they could spend for a certain provider and just get some information.
Indeed, I think kind of this collaboration was one of the keywords that we saw in the mind map earlier when we were asked when we were asking our participants what is important for digitalization. And indeed, we see the sort of matchmaking or a little encouragement for SMEs can be very helpful when looking for solutions. Irina, maybe as an experience from the hub, what role does collaboration play in more broadly when it comes to digitalization?
Well, as I was smiling because the more I start working on the hub, the more I realize that it is really, the ecosystem is really important. And we were touching on the topic of collaboration a little bit, and maybe a little background of how I met Cătălin was, so we were asked as part of the study to investigate the construction sector. And this was a new sector for us, but we've delved into it and learned a lot from it. And it was very interesting for us, and it will be part of the experiment that we will be running also as part of this project, to collaborate with specialists in terms of the actual technologies that are used in a specific sector. So people who work with advanced BIM technologies, for example, and can provide very in-depth technical support maybe to SMEs. And we wouldn't be able to do this ourselves without the support of the ecosystem, without the support of service providers to come and advertise their solutions. And the more we start developing this, I realize how important it is. And I think it will be maybe one of our main functions, in a sense, as digital innovation hubs, to enhance this and make sure we do the right matchmaking. So it's exciting.
Great. I'm a bit conscious of the time, and actually I would like to read one question from the chat, because we also had this question, at least I had it in my notes, so I think it really links nicely to the discussion. Cătălin mentioned the budgetary constraints and kind of really knowing the constraints inside which you operate as a company when digitalizing. And we also have a question in the chat on how to design digitalization actions which have impact also on the short term. Because really digitalization costs sometimes we see explode, either because the needs were not fully assessed, or because maybe it's just more complex than was initially foreseen. And usually the digitalization benefits, you see them a bit later, they're not immediate. Sometimes maybe it's a bit of a mess, and then you come out of the other side and suddenly you have a great story and everything is working well. So how to design digitalization which have an impact also on the short term. I think is maybe a question of the day for the panel. And I will allow whoever wants to react first, go first.
So if you allow me, yes, the budget is important, especially for the SMEs, because the access to funding is not so easy as for bigger corporation. But in our case, I think that digitalization was definitely it's a long-term decision, strategic decision in terms of benefits. In our case, one of the first words I wrote on the mind map was perseverance, because this is very important. So a lot of companies take this, we saw this in our counterparts in the market. They took the decision and say, okay, I'll buy the software, I will start doing that. And after a few months, they say, okay, we have to have work to do, so this is not going anywhere. It's taking too much time. And this is collaborated with the change management, because the attitude of people changing the way are used to do things together with the pressure of delivering, sometimes they got frustrated. So what we did actually, we set up let's say a lab inside our company where we hire people specifically to do this kind of testing and standard creation, procedure creation, without putting them on the process of delivering to the clients, because it's not going to happen. Of course, they interacted with the needs of the people that were working on projects to better understand what we have to do at the end, what we have to deliver. But we actually led these people as in the lab to test, develop, write it down, and generate best practice for the colleagues. So actually, you see, in general, the mixture, that there is a hybrid solution. You cannot go say, okay, I will have an unlimited budget. That's not the case. But anyhow, you have to assess a bit of the budget, at least what you can at the beginning, because even in our situation, there are things before starting you take in consideration, but there are a lot of other things that come along that are resource, let's say, expenditure. So you cannot all the time take all this in consideration. So to somehow answer the question, it's small steps, but perseverance, and also a mixture of things. People creating a lab of creating best practices, not being involved in the process of delivering meanwhile, because this is hard to handle.
So maybe indeed perseverance and starting small, experimenting if the size allows, right? Because sometimes it's the same, if in the case of very small companies, it's the same people doing a bit of everything at the same time. Irina and Katrin, would you like to add something to this complex question?
I can maybe start, Irina, if that's okay. I might highlight three little things. Like some interviews mentioned that knowing your recurring costs is very important. Not only the one-time costs, but the recurring costs that come monthly. Having a good overview is very important. Another thing is that actually not everything costs a lot, especially when you think about retail. I don't know about other industries, but for retail, for example, doing good or making good product photos is already possible with a very good cell phone camera. So some said you don't actually need to pay a lot all the time. Sometimes it's already, some things are available on the market that you can invest in one time and then you have it, and it actually helps you further for a long time. And the third thing is, sometimes you can't really see the effect or the monetary effect from the beginning, for example, my research very much focuses on local online platforms where retailers come together and collaborate. And at the moment, I have the feeling that there's not a solution where the companies actually make a lot of money with it, but the marketing effect is very good. So if they collaborate and they're available or they're visible on the market, then a lot of companies told that more people were coming into the store and mentioning the platform. So there's a combination between physical and online, and I think that becomes more important, even though you can't see the monetary effect right away.
I think these two are very key points. We'll have a presentation later by Julian, who I think will talk a little bit about these low-cost solutions that maybe you don't immediately think of them as the best practice, but usually for SMEs it can be enough. Like you mentioned, digital phone cameras can really be sufficient in some cases. And also these hidden benefits. Not all benefits can be quantified in the short run, but maybe in the long run they do bring benefits for the company. So I cannot agree more. Irina, would you like to add something as well to this question?
I just want to strengthen some points that were made, and I would be a bit blunt in saying that I don't think digitalization is a short-term thing. I don't think we should expect it to be that way. I think you needed to give it a year or more to see what it's done for you. And so if this is a short term, then yes. But I think what speaks a lot to companies is examples of good practices. And I think we need to collect them and play them over and over with information that is relevant about how much more efficient things have become and what problems has it helped solve. And I think, to me, this is the most convincing argument. And I think it's also a question of business model. And if people just adopt things without considering the full business model of their business, how they're going to use it, what their cost structures are, I think they can run into problems a little bit. And so I think digital innovation hubs, but also other supporters of digitalization and companies themselves should think about this a little bit and think a bit about the market and if their products justify, the clients justify a little bit the type of upgrade they want to build, and if not, to try to go for those markets as well. So there is a little bit of play, I think, in terms of adapting the whole business model of the company to these new digital technologies so that it completely makes sense. And that's what we want to see.
Great. We have two more questions in the chat, and I will try to ask both of them. They're quite different, but I think very interesting. So one question is about digitalization and competition. So on one hand, you have digitalization when it comes to adopting Microsoft Office or using an ERP system. So this kind of small steps that look at internal processes really, but it can also be seen as a fundamental shift in the market dynamics. We have, especially with the platform economy, we see a very big shift in how it operates. So the question, I think, is really, does the panel expect that SMEs that digitalize will face increasing competition in their markets? I think that's the question, really. And in case I phrase it wrong, I would also ask the person who wrote this question to unmute and maybe clarify your point. But if the essence of the question is clear, I will also hand over to the panel to react. Digitalization and competition in the market.
Yeah, if you let me, in my opinion, especially in construction, digitalization in terms of competition, and not only is a disruptive element now, because in construction things are done basically kind of the same way for a lot of years. So applying digitalization and modern tools shifts the paradigm, and they are actually disruptor because it changes the way company functions, they deliver, and this we have seen it in a lot of industries, no? So the possibilities change. The scalability of the business, especially in construction, is quite hard to do it. But when you use digital tools, digital processes, it is disruptive. So of course having more and more of companies doing this for sure can rise up the competition, but actually by rising up the quality of the service, maybe lowering the budgets in time, and why not shorten the times of delivery. So nowadays, I think that Irina said that also there is a marketing benefit. That's for sure, because with these tools, you even for new employees, you become more attractive. They want to work in companies that things are done a lot easier. They can focus more of their energy, less on repetitive tasks or boring tasks, but more on value adding activities. And even in the sites in construction, we see a lot of automation or semi-automation processes taking place that are based upon digital processes in the office, in the design part, in the architectural part. So all of this kind of gives a competitive edge to the companies that implement that. First as a marketing, but actually the processes become more lighter and more attractive for the client, more transparent even. So we have a lot of clients say, oh, why would we want to approach the new solution that is different? So we present them the benefits of having a clear view of their project, because we are speaking of the product. They can actually be directly connected to the development. They can see what's happening there. They can assure also as a client a certain governance and a certain quality of what's being delivered. Moreover, as I mentioned earlier, in time this can bring a reduction of time and of a better use of resourcement. And nowadays you see that we were speaking about climate and objectives or sustainability objectives. This is very hard to handle, to manage in the construction process, where there are so many stakeholders during the process, without having digital advanced tools in place that allows you this level of control and implementing this level of governance. So that's why the benefits can rise up very fast if you do this. More even in the exploitation part of the buildings. This is crucial if you want to have sustainable buildings. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Cătălin. I actually will jump to the next question for the sake of time, and it's really about change management. I think Ruta touched upon this in her presentation. We also had some questions before, and it's about how important it is to actually manage changes within the organization as we digitalize. And the question is, are there dedicated use cases for successful change management in this context? This time I will actually maybe point a finger or a pen at Irina. Does anything come to mind from the experience of Innovation Hub when it comes to change management and how to manage it successfully?
Well, this I find challenging, because I don't think there is it's not like you run a presentation or there's a methodology to change the culture of an organization. Well, there are some methodologies, but I mean it's not just something you do. It's not a new trick that you do, but more that I think you need to inspire the people and give them constant reassurance that it's possible, that they can overgo the initial period when you're still running on two systems. And this is something that I've learned also speaking to a lot of companies, also in the construction sector. And I think it will be important for digital innovation hubs to support companies through this process, because I'm sure that those years of transition are really not easy and they bring a lot of operational questions. But so I think it's a question of encouragement and maintaining the motivation and sort of creating this sort of team spirit to pull through. And then I think things come easier, but it's more of a softer skill and a softer process or softer type of support that's a bit harder to put your finger on. I think we'll be developing, for example, as part of the skills and upskilling work package in our digital innovation hub, will be helping companies create a plan to think about how the whole organization needs to change and how the positions in a company need to change as a result of the new processes and the new technologies installed. But this softer thing, I think it's a question of team building and a bit more heart to heart with the people that you work with. And I'm not sure I can give a recipe for that, but it's definitely something to keep in mind.
I think in general, it's very tempting to give recipes and to have, 5 things you should do to be successful, but the reality is very often a lot more complex. Maybe Katrin, any final remarks before we close this panel?
Thank you. When I think about change management in especially in retail, but also other industries, I think researcher academia could play a certain role, because especially when I think about these local online platforms, mostly it was that academia was involved to show a little bit of another way to develop the businesses further. There was one in the Ruhrgebiet, which is like part of central West Germany, that was developed through funding of the ministry, and also academia involved, and also the city involved. And they all together were collaborating with the retailers and showing what is necessary and how it could be done. And I think to really promote change management, especially when you have companies that develop very different and also at different times, which I think is very important when you think about digitalization. Companies that are on the market for 20 years and started also when digitalization processes just started and nobody thought of interfaces or anything. And then you have these new companies who are just evolving and have all the opportunities and who are totally different from their mindset. And I think these collaborations of academia, but also ministries and cities especially, but also other organizations or institutions are very important to promote this change management.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Again, we see the word collaboration come up again and again. So I think this is really key. And I think it's a little bit what we're doing here today. We're bringing together different people from the different sides of the ecosystem together to talk about the best practices. I also see some ideas in the chat that maybe we should also talk in the future about the worst practices or things to avoid at all costs. I think this is quite an interesting idea to explore, so we can reflect about that a little bit all together. There are some questions in the chat that I think we will explore very shortly together, as we will now have a short break. I